Today we join together for the webinar, Countering Western Influence on Islamic Youth. Assalamu alaikum everyone again. Today we join together for the webinar, Countering Western Influence on Islamic Youth. We thank you all for joining. The speaker is Dr. Fahim Mohammed, who holds a doctorate in business administration from the University of the West Indies, a MSc in strategic business IT, Portsmouth, UK, and a BSc in management from the London School of Economics, UK, alongside advanced studies in Islam and adult education. I will now pass you over to Dr. Fahim to start us off.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Haji Ahmed. Welcome, everyone, and assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. And thank you for accepting the invitation. The focus is on countering Western influence on Muslim youth. And this, essentially, the aim of all of this is to, on one part, identify the influences and the impacts of those influences. We want to talk a bit on how they were able to succeed in achieving the influences that they have and undermining Islamic values that they have, and then some ways that we could explore to counter that influence and reinforce Islamic principles in ways that would make sense and build solidarity and adherence. So that is the essence of it. We'll approach it in two parts, really. One, speaking in terms of more the youth focus and contemporary issues relating to that. And then we would switch over to a contemporary case study using the LGBTQ trust that we saw and look at how that was done and some of the narratives associated with that so that we could understand the issue better. So that is the essential plan, and I do believe that there will be a short Q&A at the interim, and you switch over to the case, and then a much longer Q&A session dedicated at the end. Right? If you have any pressing comments or concerns or questions during the course of it, you're free to use the chat and throw your question up. And we will get it at one of the scheduled intermissions, right? So let's get into this. We are today across the board in an age of transition, and we've seen a number of factors converge to shape our experience within society and as a society. Let's go back to 5.5 years ago with COVID. And that was just one in a sequence of health issues, global epidemics or pandemics that featured in society, from Ebola to the bird flu, the swine flu, and COVID. You had a number of environmental issues that featured from the 80s, really, with the ozone layer depletion into global warming, into climate change. And now we're seeing a lot more natural disasters and resource scarcity in terms of essential minerals to function, and price fluctuations as a result. On the economic side, inflation in land and home acquisition, in basic items, commodities, joblessness and jobless growth, exploitative wage rates, for those who can hold jobs, supply chain disruptions, all these often feature. On the political side, all right, so forgive that, but on the political side, you had things like wars and genocide. You had issues like tariffs and sanctions and so on, that all featured to disrupt society, the societies that we live in. And then you had things like alliances and revolution. So Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso, for example, has his own appeal. Alongside, you've seen alliances even here with Venezuela and with Trinidad prime ministers and so on. And a lot of conversations happening around that, some in support and some against. So on the political side, you've seen a lot of those. And on the social side, you're seeing a rise in the us versus them by different lenses: race, religion, immigration and nationalization status, etc. You're seeing quite a lot of superficial and transactional relationships and bases for relationships. So things have become a lot more short-term, benefit-oriented. What can I get from this relationship, and how can I get it now as soon as possible? And that's pretty much the run of it. Loyalty is eroding, and adherence or commitment to the group is eroding, and so on. A rise in impulses, so impulse buying, impulse actions and behaviors that feature. And in terms of minorities, you've seen a lot of conversation around rights, like gender equality or Black Lives Matter or whatever. And you're also seeing a rejection of minorities in things like immigration and so on. So that also is contributing to more fragmentation in the us versus them. And on the technology side, well, everything is dominated by the AI label today. But you also have virtual reality, you have things like robotics, bioengineering, and for example, getting the extra chromosome out of Down syndrome patients before birth, and those kinds of things. In general, you have mass media, social media, and mobile communication, where you're seeing a 24/7 attention economy that thrives on outrage and thrives on fear. So we're selling fear: AI is going to take your jobs, the climate is disrupted, etc. And you're seeing a lot of that dominate the headlines because it's sensational. You have the weird paradigm that exists. Now, weird is the acronym that is used to describe the popular sentiment online, right? White, educated, industrial, rich Democrats. And that is generally what you found. We've often acknowledged that for years. Harvard Business Review, for example, and one of the articles out of MIT, if I'm not mistaken, have spoken to that. That is the dominant paradigm online, because those are the persons with greatest access to the technologies and the most frequent engagement of technologies. And therefore, their sentiment kind of takes default. That is changing as the internet penetrates and reaches and so on. But you also find that that paradigm influences others. And we saw it, for example, with the Arab Spring, which seeded the Occupy movement. Youths clamoring for change in governance to be able to access more of the liberties and the commodities that they are exposed to, right? Back in 2011. And normalization, the algorithms are not neutral. The social media algorithms, they do tend to push normalization or acceptance of what they deem as popular agendas. And that is documented in academia as well. So there's a lot going on at the end of it. And for the youths in particular, it's a lot to reconcile because changes are happening a lot faster and with a lot more impact across the board, right? So that being the case, where do the youth sit? Generally, what you find is their sentiment is, number one, the world is broken, and we, being the older generations, are the ones who broke it. So things like Big Pharma and GMO, the bankers and economists, the political and religious leaders, corporate players, and their impacts on the environment, and the privileged in whatever lens that they view the world from, were the ones who created the problem. And what that means for them is, although there is a higher emphasis on work-life balance and not killing yourself for an employer, nor being necessarily loyal to an employer, you break up your career into different parts and you jump on the bandwagon that is going to take you there the fastest. And in spite of those trends in Gen Z and Gen Alpha employability, it also means that they are unable to get jobs, that they cannot afford housing, that they cannot afford uh, medical care. Vehicles and travel are out of reach for many, or they have to endure a lower quality of services to fit within their budget. And those issues lead to, not these issues in isolation, but these issues in addition to the transactional and superficial relationships, etc., lead to a preponderance of depression, of loneliness. Although we're more connected to a lot more people from all over the world, we are isolated when we move away from one screen to another, right? And we don't connect as deeply with persons. So there's depression, there's a propensity towards suicide, higher suicide rates, especially among younger um, youths. An underlying sentiment of anger or angst or anxiety about the future, and cynicism in the relative scheme of things. A sense almost of foreboding or hopelessness in terms of things getting better. The response has been that, look, we broke the world and they are suffering the consequences of it, and they now have to recast the world in a form that is workable for them. So we said gay rights and so on, those things were wrong, and therefore they have to reshape that. And we said private, the enjoyment of private property, and you see a trust or a rise in squatting in some jurisdictions and stuff like that. You're seeing a lot more of those reactions where they are rejecting the old paradigms and they are moving towards what their interpretations of a functional future must include. At the same time, it's not all doom and gloom, and I apologize if it comes across like that, but it is amplified in the grand scheme of things and how they work today. But at the same time, there are some redeeming factors. They were, a couple of years ago, shaken by the fate of the people of Gaza. How could you be so calm in the face of such crisis and oppression? And what is it that makes you keep fighting and makes you keep resisting and holding on and keeping it together? And you had a lot of persons throughout Europe and so on who converted to Islam as a result of that. Here was something that a coping mechanism or a model of coping that showed an alternative, because the people of Gaza had nothing. They didn't even have somewhere to live, right? And yet they were holding on and they were showing strength and resilience in that regard. In a tamer version, conversion or reversion aside, a lot of them chose to, at the graduation ceremonies, tear up their certificates of graduation in opposition to institutions that support the Israeli government and agendas. which is remarkable because it shows quite some insistence and principles in this upcoming generation. Yeah, willingness to stand up for what they think is right. So that being the case, if we leave this unaddressed, what we can expect to see more of is, on one part, declining attendance or interest in religion and religious institutions, or even an outright abandonment of religious values and or beliefs and or practices. Okay? On the other side, you can find greater leaning towards more radical ideologies. For example, in Trinidad and Tobago, we had the highest population per capita that participated in ISIS. That's national newspaper reported statistics, as an example. And generally, on the individual level, you can expect to find greater anguish or poor coping mechanisms and choices. The ones that dominate things like doom scrolling or mindless scrolling, chasing fleeting narratives as they appear and disappear, and things like alcohol and drugs, many drugs being legalized in today's context in different jurisdictions, gambling, sexual relations, and reckless abandon as a label. But embedded within that is a propensity to more risk-taking pursuits at the expense of life, because it seems to have less meaning anyway, right? The question becomes, where does Islam sit in all of this? And what is the message that Islam brings within this dynamic that we're seeing today? And we recognize a couple of things. Islam was built on surviving turmoil and turbulence. The Prophet, peace be on him, the revelations did not wait until things were in favor of the Prophet, peace be on him, to be revealed. It started and triggered a lot of angst and a lot of backlash. So the days of Jahiliyyah were really, really bad, a lot worse than we see today. And yet within one generation, we saw a society develop to levels that were unimagined up to that point. So Islam is built, in the midst of that turmoil, and it establishes a model that we can draw upon. It creates principled stands on issues that matter, and it creates a community or communities of character. You have, for example, the institution of Darul Arqam in the days of the early days of Islam, where there was a community that got together, all those who accepted the message of the Prophet, peace be on him, and they got together to reinforce each other's faith and spirituality and learning and material well-being as well. They didn't start with a political party or a lobby group. They didn't start with a military initiative. And so that's a interesting example to consider. And then you have resilience in adversity, or thinking that is independent of mainstream or popular influences. And the best examples of that would be the four Imams in the various schools of fiqh, all of whom were ostracized by society in their lifetimes, jailed by the leaders, and many of them executed. Right? In the history of the Imams and their lives, many of them underwent tremendous sacrifice, and yet still maintain examples of holding firm to the beliefs in spite of all the adversity. And those are elements of examples that we can highlight on how as individuals, as communities, and as a society, we can overcome hardship on one part. We could find consolation in the face of challenges and stay determined and focused in a faith-driven system, in things like deference to the will of Allah and accountability on the day of judgment, for example. And as well, things like individual discipline and community care. Maintain your times for salat and regulate your life according to the timelines established within there, as one example. Or just to be good and have good relations with others and so on, as one aspect of community care. So there are many examples that can help to give our youth in particular, but individuals in general, the capability to inculcate many of these things, overcome hardship, find consolation, retain focus, build individual discipline, and establish care for the community. In that context, what we see as a requirement or a responsibility placed on our leaders today at any level, at the family level, at the Jamaat level, and wider society, is to be able to guide, influence, console the youths through the challenges that they are facing and collaborate with them or work with them to help solve the problems. And through that, some of the things that specifically we'll want to focus on is steering the narrative so that it does not have to be all doom and gloom and outrage and fear that is being sold or fed constantly on social media feeds. There is a positive side to all of it, on the spiritual side, and a life of peace and so on. There's a holistic living where you're not only giving in to impulses and chasing the next popular thing, but you're taking a more holistic view of life and the different dimensions of life across financial, across spiritual, across the psychology of resilience, all towards a life of peace, which is different from a life of happiness that is purported in the West or promulgated in the West. Yeah, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die is the general sentiment, and Islam takes that different trajectory to say, look, it's not about happiness, which is fleeting, but it's about peace, which is more enduring and more relative. So there's a huge opportunity to sell hope and to sell community or belonging. And that is an opportunity that we face today that that we're probably not hearing enough of. I don't know what the context is in your environment, but definitely online, we're not seeing enough of those messages directed with those teams. Yeah. Or the effects of it, which is a greater resilience and a rejection of mainstream influences that contradict Islamic values and so on. So that, in essence, posits us at a position, reflection point, and I would like to elaborate on how that manifests in different examples. You have a number of different examples that feature secularism on one part, materialism on one part, and social attitudes towards issues on another. And this case is built out on the issue of GLB or LGBTQ as that example. So let's get into this issue. And what we have seen in this issue is a classic example of Western influence within our generation. From the 80s to today, the situation has made a full 180, or reverse. It was hidden, now it's public. It was remote, now it's global. Criminalized, now legal. Condemned is now celebrated, and scorned is now emulated or mirrored. And here's an example. We recently had on May the 9th, LGBT hike to mermaid pools, in Trinidad. And you're seeing a greater integration of that ideology into our society today. There are many examples that fit here, of course, but this is just one that stands out because this is one example, and it's pretty prominent in the fact that it's so close to leisurely pursuits, harmless leisurely pursuits. So that's interesting. How did we get here? There are two lenses to this thing, one in terms of timelines and one in terms of the quality or the qualitative, the narrative that was offered. And the essential point is that nobody wants to know that they're being used, and nobody wants to know that they're being manipulated to fight a battle that others would benefit at their expense. So why am I saying that? Well, you had in 1989 the fall of the Berlin Wall, and at that point, the radical left, which was focused entirely on anti-communism stances, had to reinvent themselves. So Nancy Wilson wrote, for example, in one academic publication on the need to shift from redistribution of wealth to recognition of minorities. And that was the central thesis, if you will, for persons to reinvent their advocacy on a different trajectory, move away from redistribution and move towards recognition of minorities. 1 year after the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was 89, and in tandem with the fall of communism in Russia, the World Health Organization, the UN body, made a significant change to their rules and insight. And they declassified homosexuality as a mental disorder, and they said, well, it's perfectly natural. So that started or precipitated that advance of that issue. You had in 2008 the Resolution on Human Rights, which was supported by a minority of people. The majority of the countries either rejected it, 55 rejected, and 48 abstained entirely. And then you had in 2011 the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Resolution, which really framed the entire issue as these people should not be persecuted based on a lifestyle choice. So a lot more people agreed with that resolution that, look, we're not necessarily encouraging it, but they should not be persecuted. So you had 91 people, 91 countries voting in favor of. At the same time, you had the Organization of Islamic Conferences pass their equivalent, which was the Islamic Charter of Human Rights. And I'm not sure how popular that is within the Muslim community, but many people I speak to have no idea that it exists. But there's the Human Rights Charter by the UN, and there's the Islamic Human Rights Charter by the OIC, with the Islamic equivalent. Nevertheless, you had a lot of follow-up work by different institutions, and we'll unpack that in a little more detail as we go along. So in terms of timeline, this all started with the fall of communism. And many people ask, how did this happen? How did this issue get so popular in the recent past? When we were growing up, we heard, or we used to hear, nothing about this. It wasn't popular at all. So over the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, the past 30 35 years, you have seen that progression, right, in society. The arguments and the evolution of the issues is also pretty telling on the qualitative side. It started off as gender equality, and here was an issue everybody could get behind. If you're doing the same work, you should get the same pay. You should not be discriminated against because of your gender. So a lot of people got onto that bandwagon, everybody, in fact. And people started to fall off as the issues evolved. So the support dwindled. So you had freedom of gender roles. Women could choose their career, choose whether to have an abortion or not, and so on. And you started to get some resistance, a lot of it from women who chose to be homemakers, and that was going against what the feminists saw as advancing their successes, right? So some loss in support there. And then it changed to freedom of sexual choice, i.e., the freedom to be homosexual or not. And that quickly evolved into sexual equality or sexual orientation equality, which we know as gay rights. And from there, we evolved again, freedom of gender identity, the choice on whether to be considered a male or a female, or everywhere in between. And now we've taken that one step further, and gender identity equality. People should be accepted based on their individual choice. At every step moving forward, you saw more and more fallout, to the point where now it's open fractures and open wounds, and you have very animated support for or against particular issues. So the narratives have evolved, and now they have all kind of converged because we didn't really get closure on one before we moved on to the next. And they all became kind of lumped together. Some of the justifications that are used for these issues. You have, this thing was very normal in human history, and they use interpretations of artifacts. A lot of those interpretations have been discredited by academia itself as an overreach. However, the argument stays, the sentiment stays, I should say, and it has done a lot more for supporting acceptance than it has for withstanding academic scrutiny. So the argument is that, look, based on these paintings and these figures drawn on these artifacts in Greece and in other parts of the world, Mesopotamia and so on, that's an indication that this thing is natural. In world religions, you have a number of different references throughout the Old and the New Testament, within Hinduism and Buddhism and so on, that all speak directly to the issue of excesses, and they have been reinterpreted to introduce doubt on how explicit those references really are. So now, although the references would say it's an abomination for a man to sleep with the next man and so on, they would reference the context in which that verse sits and say, well, it speaks in this issue and not in that issue and so on. So you also have justifications from using religious texts and playing on the context in which the texts were introduced. You're seeing some of that even in Islam by some movements. So that is happening. On the academic side, the emphasis was on very natural occurrences, And I'll give you an example. The anglerfish, I believe it's called. The male is very small compared to the female, and he latches on to the female and he merges into the female to become basically a impregnator on demand as the female chooses. So that is given as an example of transgender naturally occurring in the world. And again, many of these things have been robustly discredited, but the sentiment and the justification or the argument as a justification lingers. And on the moral principle, in terms of moral principle, the argument is everybody should be free. The government or those in control or those in power should not have a say in what my choices are for sexual orientation or gender identity and such. And we saw when Trump immediately came into power in this last instance, he did a big reversal of that, at a national level. But in fact, the freedom to practice whatever and the equality to be recognized for practicing whatever, or the equality to freely practice whatever, are the essential messages on the moral side. And in fact, that is the name of the UN's campaign to advance this agenda, free and equal. Yeah. So not much imagination went into the labeling of the campaign. They just stuck with what was at the core. These are all, of course, elaborated in the book, which I'll introduce in as we go along. What we are seeing is growing resistance globally to all of this advocacy. In 1990, the OIC Declaration on Human Rights in Islam I alluded to previously. So that set the foundation for what is acceptable in terms of Islam, and it speaks to freedom of media and freedom of speech, as well as some of these propensities of persons to practice stuff. This was a snapshot of the countries for and against on the resolution. And all along, a lot of the Muslim countries in particular have kept GLB issues criminalized. In 2019 to present, you saw an acceleration of that rejection of a GLB agenda. So Brunei, Uganda, and the timelines are pretty telling. Brunei in 2019, Uganda in 23, Kazakhstan in 25. This next country, I wouldn't even attempt to pronounce its name. Kyrgyzstan. Well, I would attempt Kyrgyzstan or wherever in 25. And you started to see over the past 2 years or 3 years in particular, a growing movement at the national legislative level to reject those imposed values. Right? However, what we are seeing, and the book highlights some of this, and the training program that accompanies this would elaborate more. You are seeing a shift in attitudes, and you are seeing a movement from rejection, outright rejection, to or for tolerant or accommodating, or people should be free to do what they think. We don't really care about that, and let them be. We have no part of it, but we're not going to denounce or decry them for that. Right? So you're seeing that shift in attitudes, and I would say one of the tools that are available under development and close to completion is a attitude survey that I would ask for your cooperation to share with your communities so that we can get a sense of, within the Muslim community, what are the attitudes really? What are the dominant attitudes? What are the attitudes of note towards these issues? And based on that research, we can at least have a sense of whether it's something we need to address now, whether it's a growing concern that we need to pay attention to. Um, are we trying to bolt the stable after the horse has already darted? Uh, and if so, then what kind of corrective measures we could take? The whole point of this, how did they achieve this shift? We spoke about what the arguments were and justifications and the institutions and organs that were involved. But what was the logic really? Well, the first step was to start where we all can agree, and then we advance the causes based on that. So we could all agree that if we're doing the same work, we should all get the same pay regardless of gender. And then from there, well, let's move it forward to this, and then let's move it forward to that. So that was one foundation strategy that was undertaken. Next step was to advocate for legislation to decriminalize the issue. So we remove the fear of being penalized, being criminalized based on the issue itself. And you had a lot of UN organs who were involved in advancing that interest. I listed the key ones here: the Human Rights Council, UNDP, the Family Planning Association, FPA, UN Women, SOGI as well. A next strategy that was taken was to reward compliance financially in the context of multilateral funding agencies in particular, who tied approvals for national loans and funding initiatives and programs to acceptance of the imposed values and the imposed system. So if you decriminalize GLB within your legislative structure, then you stand a better chance to gain so much more funding and so on. And also on the side of social influence in terms of fashion and merchandise, which were designed to become popular, particularly in the media. GLAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance for Advancing Resisting Discrimination, in essence. You had organizations like Vice Media who would sponsor or only fund initiatives that featured that theme within their program construct. And then, of course, educational institutions and textbooks. We had our own experience a couple of years ago where parents found GLB themes within textbooks that were being assigned to children, and the minister came and rejected the move and whatever not. That was back in 23, if I'm not mistaken. So you had a number of different strategies that were pursued in order to advance the agenda. In the book, we do highlight, as an example, the media initiatives, because that has been one of the most visible signs of success, right? The media initiatives, including things like content inclusion, also watchdog, anything that appears discriminatory, advertising pressure. You get more advertising if you were to feature these types of content, etc. Platform strategy, infrastructure, funding, data and research. And the underlying essence is, number one, you don't need to win over everybody all at once. What you need to do is just tackle key institutions, legislation on one part and media on the other. And you can engineer acceptance to a very successful degree just with those two alone, just those two levers alone, right? And a well-crafted narrative. Of course, appreciate a lot of funding has been thrown at the issue, right? The target audiences, just to featured or close out the GLB wins in the past 30 years. So there was a focus on pornification and hypersexualization of everything. The more sexualized we could make issues and content and media and diagrams and images and pictures and so on, is the more likely we are to get people to respond to material that we put out, because we are appealing to baser instincts, right? So fashion, music videos, children's toys, etc., all had elements of that, and you have actual watch groups who are document and monitor these activities. Hold on. All right. In terms of adolescents, a huge target focus has been on adolescents and youths, because they are in the phase or the stage of experimentation, of adventure, and trying to find boundaries, rebellion or attention seeking, going against the norms established by the elders, and of course identity formation. They are now trying to determine who they are as individuals, and within that, or concurrent with that, you have the social circles and those influences. So peer influence and weakened family filters, in fact, eroding family structure. A lot more divorces, a lot more single parent homes means a lot more effeminate men, for example, or butch women coming into the system, and less family filters. So families are working harder, spending less time together. There's less opportunity to filter the conversation or the content that children are exposed to. And of course, in the schools and outside of the schools, they are exposed to persons who are from different backgrounds and value systems, and who might glorify or accept alternative lifestyles. So a lot of ground has been gained over the past 20 years with the youth in particular, who are now becoming adults. What we do in the book, The Straight Path, what we do is we start to unpack what are the Islamic positions, or we unpack what are the Islamic positions as it relates to issues such as genders and gender identity. So Islam clearly states there are two genders, male and female. Issues of modesty in the face of pornification or hypersexualization of everything. Issues of sexual relations, directly in issues of homosexuality. And we do explore some other elements of it. Frequently asked questions: why are these things spontaneous, and are they still Muslim, and what should be the punishment, etc., etc.? Can they serve as imams? Is a popular one. Sorry. So we do unpack these things, and I have to acknowledge the cooperation and support from Professor Sabir Ali of Al-Azhar University, who informed a lot of the Islamic positions. We had defined it at the Majlisul Ulama before, so kudos to the scholars in that circle. But he took it a step further and looked at the 8 schools of fiqh and what their positions are, and so on, and was able to really enhance the understanding of the Islamic position as it relates to all of this. I wouldn't go into, I don't plan to go into details here, that'll just take a lot, but I do want to highlight that that is well elaborated, thoroughly addressed within the text itself. And for example, you have different perspectives that feature. around what the issues are and what the Islamic response needs to be. So this is one that you don't hear much of, for example. Um, Usually what you hear is they should be stoned to death, or they should be killed, or they should be thrown off from a tall building, or they should be isolated and ostracized from society, mainstream society. Those are the normal knee-jerk reactions, if you will, based on Islamic Sharia. You don't hear that the punishment has to be prescribed by a qadi, for example. You don't hear that there are different responses to different situations um, within Islam by traditional and contemporary scholarship. So, so I'm just highlighting this as an example. I don't want you to think that we're trying to engineer acceptance. This is not about promoting or encouraging or accepting any of this propensity. It's really meant to be clarity and, most importantly, a response program. So let's get into the response. You have different levels at which responses can happen. On one part, on the individual level, right, there's a requirement to understand the issues and the narratives, and to be able to engage the people involved and the rationale, or at least understand who are the people involved and the rationale that are used to bolster support, right? So that we understand the narratives, and that prepares us to respond in an appropriate manner. At the institutional and community level, what it means is, once we have defined a narrative that works for our community, that counters the influence, or that changes the conversation, if you will, then that could be filtered out through things like sermons, khutbahs, education or training programs, just dialogue, a lime or a fireside chat, or a study circle, or whatever terminology is used. And we can point people towards different priorities. So look, you'll want to be modest. You'll want to not give in to impulses. You'll not want to commit or fulfill every desire. You'll want to have restraint, and so on. Those are some of the messages that could, for example, could come out. And of course, at the national or wider social level, there are many groups that are equally concerned about issues that affect similar values. So the Seventh-day Adventists, or the broader Christian community, for example, we might find opportunities to create alliances, to collaborate, to share insights at the executive level and at the community levels, right? To facilitate that conversation. The book also has some of those narratives crafted. For those who see nothing wrong with the issue, this is what you need to know about what Islam says. For those who identify as JLB, this is what the Islamic position is. For parents and siblings dealing with persons who identify as JLB, this is what you need to consider. Non-family members, co-workers, whatever. Here's a version of a response that you can incorporate. How do we deal with it at the media level, and as community leaders, and as parents or educators within society? We try to capture some of the essential elements across each of these, so that you would be able to pick which ones work best in your community or with your audience. And you, of course, are free to share it, refine it, distill it into whatever form works best for your audience. right? What's available right now? So we have the publication, which is the straight part, navigating LGBTQ issues in Muslim society. And that is more of a text, if you will. There's a training program that is soon to be released that you can, in fact, register for the pre-release, but that would be free and online and open enrollment, self-study. So you can, as a parent or leader, if you decide, look, you want to make a dent in the influences within your community and you want to explore the issues, then that is also available. It's a two-part, one in terms of knowledge of the issues and one in terms of a response framework or a response program to get practice in actually building the tools that you want to use, right? There is a baseline survey of GLB attitudes that is being developed as well. And we could share that with you and we could give you the findings for your community if you choose, or for the wider survey population if you prefer. That's entirely up to you. But I would ask for your cooperation in that regard. There's so many things that are missing, and this is where as community leaders, as community participants, this is where there is a gap that needs to be closed, and you have that opportunity to serve within there. Counseling on one part, fostering alliances and collaboration with other stakeholders on another, activism, just creating content that reinforce the values, because we don't have the fund. I imagine we don't have the funding to the likes of some of the pro GLB institutions like GLAD and ILGA and whatever. But we could crowdsource content creation and be just as effective for free. There are not enough watch groups globally and locally, maybe none at all. I don't know. There are a couple advocacy groups, but these are some of the areas where we can mature a lot more in terms of the issues that we face and countering the influences. But that's what is immediately available. The concern is, especially for leaders, and this is for the training program, these are some of the things that we cover. Know the terms, know the drivers and the media of influence. We spoke about these things at a surface level, and in the text, we actually go down into depth on it. Get the perspective of various stakeholders, etc. In other words, build the awareness, craft the narrative, and then execute the program. And you would see more of that on the second module of the training program. Just start with an attitude survey to see, well, do we need to be more preventative or more corrective? Do we need to be directly involved? Do we need to just allude to it in more general terms, etc.? And develop the response and maybe even build a team that can incorporate the values and the messages that we would like our community to see. At the end of the day, I recognize that there's not much we can't force a choice, especially in issues like this. We could demand and dictate, but if people want to pursue that, is on them, and there are many ways to hide and do it, right? I'm saying that we do have a section that deals with indicators or behaviors that suggest. You'd be surprised at, if we were to look at what are the behaviors that suggest someone is gay, at the surface level, how wrong we are, and at the more granular level, how unassuming the indicators might be. So there would probably be some surprises there as you navigate that section. But that in essence, I would want to roll that out or close this off here. That in essence is looking at the GLB case in terms of how to engineer social acceptance and what would be required to be able to counter that influence in the context of GLB or LGBTQ, whatever connotation of the label you prefer. As one example of a broader issue where our youths are being steered into a particular psychology and paradigms that may not be in their best interests and definitely is not going to support the furtherance of Islamic values. Right? I hope that was of interest and of value. So that being said, I would stop here and invite any questions or concerns or comments. And in doing so, I would at the same time hand over to Haji Ahmed to facilitate. I'm seeing the question, how prevalent is the LGBTQ issue amongst Muslims in Trinidad? The easy answer to that, Imam Hafiz, is we don't know. The indicators are not encouraging, and you could get more details from any principal of any secondary Muslim secondary school, but the indicators are not positive, and the issue is more prevalent than we probably would care to admit. The whole thrust of all of this is that parents have been found to be unaware of the arguments and incapable of having that conversation, not knowing enough, and the subject being taboo, and therefore it becomes confrontational very quickly and dysfunctional, and perhaps there's another way. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question, but in the absence of survey data, all we could use are indicators, and the indicators are that it's a very popular issue amongst teenagers today in schools, across schools, and you could speak to any secondary school teacher or principal to get more insight. In many cases, by people we would be surprised, this children of people we'd be surprised to know. And that's what I would say on that. I hope that helps. All right, any other questions?
Yes, Fahim. Assalamu alaikum.
Hey, walaikum salam.
Fees Bakshi here. I must compliment you on your presentation. It is quite an informative presentation. I didn't know what to expect when I signed up for this, so I must compliment you on that, right? But as I asked in the chat just now, right, how prevalent the issue is, and you did say that it is prevalent amongst in the schools and so on, right? And I wasn't aware of that, and I'm wondering.
And maktabs as well. Sorry to interject. Any maktabs as well.
In maktabs too?
Yes. In fact, one of you here in your Jamaat, you have that issue manifesting.
Okay, well, I'm not aware. I'm now hearing this for the first time, and I'll have to investigate it. And well, okay.
I'm not saying you're Jamaat. I'm saying one of you on this meeting right now, you have a problem. One of you in your Jamaat.
Or in one of the Jamaat for people who are.
Yeah,
okay, because see, I mean, I am around for a little while now, and I never really had to deal with this issue. Now, you do see people who, in the past, used to have names and things for them, right? But
Right.
a lot of these, you know, a lot of these people, they are how they are because of maybe hormones and those kinds of things. I think Brother Mirza is one right now, and I know Brother Mirza deal a lot with more with young people and so on, right? So he might be able to shed some light and so on. But I have never had to deal with this issue. I know it's an issue locally and internationally, right? But at the mosque level, I have never had to deal with this LGBT issue. You do see people, right? And you can't brand somebody because of how they may carry about themselves. You
Yeah.
know, so um, I really don't know, like how I have never had to deal with, so I don't know how
Yeah.
to deal with this thing. I
Right.
probably will have to read the book, right?
Right.
All right. So
Yeah.
I'll stop there, and I'm pretty sure that probably somebody like Brother Mirza will be able to shed some light from his perspective.
Sure. And just before we hand over to anyone else, I would say the whole argument of nature versus nurture and so on is one, of course, that we dealt with. And you have the distinction as well between sexual orientation and gender roles, gender identity. So that some people might behave effeminate, but their sexual orientation is heterosexual. And some people might behave well within the defines of their genders. So they appear very masculine, but in fact, they may be homosexual. So we unpack those issues in detail in the book because that is, that's something that features. And we make that distinction amongst the different issues. There's a whole other side to it in terms of sexual what's the term, boy? Sexual preference, orientation, and sexual preferences. So that is where the asexual and cisgender, pansexual, and all that issue arises. I left that out. That's in the book dealt with in its own way. Because number one, it's something you had to take your time to digest. It's confusing to wrap your head around because the authors of it are themselves apparently extremely confused about all of this, right? So we do unpack the issues in more detail, section by section, um, in the book, yeah, yeah, and we would attempt to do that in we attempted to do that in the training program, um, but the training program we haven't released yet. So I just throwing that out there for your consideration. All right. Anybody else? And yeah, I see
Yeah.
Sheikh
Yeah.
Mirza.
No, man, Brother Mary. For him, well done, a good presentation. I like the fact that we're dealing with data and research. Excellent. And I'm looking forward to read the book. A couple of quick comments. One is there is a target for the children, and just three quick examples. Sesame Street introduced a character with two fathers. Number one, Peppa Pig has a character with two mothers, gay relationship, and the CEO of Disney says that she will ensure is that 40-50% of the lead characters will be transgender or gay in the next year or so. So it really is an onslaught on children. I think onslaught is not a bad word to use. But one of the issues we face is that I have had several of these issues to deal with, several of them, right? And I'm telling you, it's not only the males, it's even the females. Females and lesbianism and gay and homosexuality within the Muslim community is a real issue, real. But one of the main issues I think we faced was that because it's not one of my core areas, we didn't have people to recommend them to. In fact, some of them went to the non-Muslim counselors who studied at UWI and other institutions. And these people were telling the parents of these children, you are old-fashioned, why don't you accept them, hormones, and so on and so on. There was one Muslim clinical psychologist who we in fact had that we sent people to, and he was able to work with these people, and they were able to come out of the scenario and the situation they were in. So there's a dearth or lack of Muslim psychologists, Muslim clinical psychologists who could deal with this in an appropriate way, going to anybody who is trained in the Western system and the Western sciences, will tell people, accept it, accept it, accept it. So I think the book is useful. I think the training program will even be more useful to prepare people for what is there. Whether it's predominant, was it prevalence, we don't know, but I can tell you several cases, male and female, have come to us, and we have had to deal with several of these over the years. Yeah, sorry about that. Thanks.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, well, thanks for the positive feedback, first of all. And yes, I agree. Expanded support, as we are seeing as well on this side, things like counseling and family mediation services are not readily available. And more fundamental to that, parents are untrained in what the issues are or what the arguments are and how to deal with it. So they defer to force, dictates and force. And that's not the best approach. You're pushing the children further away instead of bringing them closer to you. In fact, I would highlight one thing. A lot of these things are algorithm driven, and the algorithms on social media and so on are engineered to advance or normalize certain agendas, right? So that's one thing. But the algorithms, how they operate is they work based on relationship. The more you are on your phone, the more you are on your computer, the more material the algorithm has to work with, the better it knows individual preferences, what content you consume from which persons at what time of which day on which device, etc. So the basis for all of this is that relationship and entertainment. What they cannot counter in the home is that influence based, the opportunity to influence based on relationships. If you have a close relationship with your family as a family, then the algorithm cannot compete with that. However, a lot of parents throw their hands up in the air, put a tablet in the child's hands, and even with parental filters and things on, which are defined by the algorithm itself, you still have content getting through. And that engineers people to see it as more normal and more acceptable. So there's a huge opportunity there on the family level to foster or advance those relationships that could counter any algorithm and media content, right? But that is a function of how good you are as a family, how close-knit you are as a family, and that's kind of up in the air at this point. I'm just throwing that out there as well. Right, I saw a question here. Are they going into secondary from primary with this behavior? To be honest with you, I'm not sure. The research on people's responses by age would give an indication of at what age people tend to lean into one thing or the other, but one direction or the other. But generally, where identity is facilitated, defining identity is facilitated, is in that teenage period where they're testing boundaries, they're experimenting with different things. Drugs, alcohol, and things used to be the rebellion of choice, but now it's evolved even further. So where's that identity defined? It might well be the majority of cases in the secondary school, in the primary school. I really don't know. And a conversation with teachers would give some insight into how prominent the issue is for the 10 and 9-year-olds, right? I know there are some instances of it, but to what extent is that dominant? I can't say. Right. Getting the attention of Muslims to respond to lectures is getting more difficult. You have to find a way to get this conversation where it needs to be. Yes, I agree with you fully. And in fact, this is Imam Talib. Awesome. I agree with you fully, which is why at the very beginning we focused on what the concerns are for the youth, because that is where it's content in those areas that would resonate. So, for example, how do you um, overcome joblessness, and how do you work around that? Well, there's entrepreneurship, there's internship, there's community support for projects and so on that could enhance your CV. The Muslim community could start some inter-Jamaat job placement system, for example, where the imams could coordinate. I mean, all of it is just data in. It's like you're creating a job version of links. So this Jamaat has somebody who does geriatric care. This Jamaat needs somebody to do geriatric care. Well, let's just place them together. Stuff like that are easy ways to overcome at the community and Muslim community level. Easy ways to overcome some of these challenges. And the lingering sentiment will be, you know what, that Imam rel help out, right? Which builds that bond and that allegiance to the Jamaat and the community. On the individual level, things like depression, things like loneliness, things like angst about the future are issues that are well developed in Islamic scholarship. From the Quran and from the Sunnah, Imam Hafiz, for example, does this thing on tafsir on Surah Joseph. I saw my daughter have an assignment to do. Just in that example of sibling rejection and ostracization and temptation and whatever, you have so many themes emerging that it really creates an opportunity for you to draw from your preferred areas, use your strengths to deliver messages that would resonate with the audience. You're feeling lonely? Well, guess what? Here's this story from the 3 men in the cave or 7 men or wherever it was. And here's this other thing about the prophet, peace be on him, coming from Taif and so on. So that's where the content could be. And having an event and inviting people may not be the way, but having a community group and getting a message out on the devices to the group is a good way to capture their attention and their interest. And with that, you can steer them towards, well, let's have a conversation. You'll fall in. We're having a meeting to discuss Islam and the West on the next Maulud function we have or whatever. So there are ways that you could do that. And I mean, for the second module of the training program, you would see, for example, some things like that customer journey model where you reach a number of people and you break it back down into how many people you get at different stages of the transaction process to the point of conversion or engagement. So they're different things. And I mean, I wouldn't want to elaborate. I could just go on and on, but yeah, it means working differently at the end of the day. Not doing the same thing and hoping for a different result, but looking at what works and emulating that with your narrative. Yeah, at that level.
Fahim, just a 30-second example.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Quickly, a parent came to see me one time and showed me some text messages his daughter is receiving, inviting her to a lesbian ring in the school. And the school is an all-girl Muslim school. Just highlighting that to show that it's really a real issue, number one. Number two, I think your book might be the first of its kind that is data-driven and evidence-based, dealing with the issue. Before that, there was a loose network of people saying, well, we hear this and we do this and we think this. So I think the book is useful to put things in perspective. And I think the training program, as you as you want to do, accompanying the book, I think will be extremely useful. And you may have to run several cohorts in order to really get the message out. Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And yes, you're right. It is prevalent in some circles that we may not be aware of on one part. The book is available for free download, by the way, at maiinstitute.com. So you're not limited to a physical copy. We have physical copies you could liaise with Haji Ahmed. I'm not sure how many are left, but you could liaise with Haji Ahmed to arrange for your copy. And it's available for free download as well. The training program, I would prefer to keep it self-study. So anybody could log in at any time and pursue the training and get the certification and do the activities and build the competence to pursue it. That's kind of the model that we're working towards. But appreciated. Anybody else? Any other questions? Sorry, my response is going on real long. Well, try to keep it short. Any other comments or questions or concerns?
Fahim, if I could probably change another issue, really a big issue amongst the Muslim community is the issue of divorce amongst young people. I don't know if you have any plan to deal with that or how that could be dealt with, because I was checking recently and about 51% of the marriages that I do, well, the ones that are registered, end in divorce.
Right. Well, in fact, so all right. One thing that is available, and I'll just pull this up on the screen, so bear with me. One thing that is available is at the Majlis Ul Ulama, we actually did a paper on divorce and a paper on marriage. And it was not just, well, this is what divorce means in Islam and whatever not. It was actually with programs for, yes, sir.
Okay.
Hold on 1 second, and I'll just pull in this on the screen and bear with me. So that you'll see what is immediately available in this instance. And I'm sharing, hold on, I'm taking off the share and I'm sharing screen one, right? Right, so on on the Majlis Ul Ulama, we did a paper on divorce. We look at the definition, the role of divorce, social trends, reasons for it. And there's a paper, a PDF paper in better format that you could download. The divorce process in Islam, different types of divorce, matters surrounding the issue. So the rights of women, children, etc. And then we did go into conflicts as a result of divorce, supporting institutions and services that are available, and what type of help people need. This was a whole ecosystem mapped out. You'll probably see it better on the PDF, towards identifying and addressing the issues related to divorce. And I think it went on to, was it care boy or domestic violence boy? Messages to people who going through divorce. Yeah, it wasn't here. And some of the institutions that they could contact. I know in domestic violence, we had a much more elaborate thing on the institutions, all the institutions, but the issue of divorce, really, I don't know what else we could add to this. This paper in and of itself covers the issues from the modern, secular, and Islamic perspectives as it relates to managing that scenario. And it's designed for both persons contemplating or undergoing divorce, as well as leaders trying to prevent the occurrence or correct the issues. So you have resources available. We have like this for divorce, we have for marriage, we have for domestic violence. We don't have for addiction, but that might be the next phase, to be honest.
Okay, fine. Thanks.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So you understand there are some resources available. Yeah, yeah. And the infrastructure to bring them out is something that we building now on a different level. So GLB was the first. You'll see a lot more potential. Right, noted, Mufti Azhar, and thanks so much for your attendance, and that's really appreciated, and your comments as well. Haji Imran, I seen a comment from you. Awesome. Yeah, and you could get the book online as well, and you could liaise with Haji Ahmed. That's in your mosque, right? So you could waylay him on the way to Maghrib and force the issue. This topic seems embarrassing based on how we publish the theme or topic. Yes, just naming the book, I had some concerns. But what is the way to draw the interest of everyone? The general approach would be to recognize that you have different target audiences and you would need different messages to the different target audiences. So for parents, you would want to approach parents in a certain way with a certain message. And for children, you'd want to approach them in a different way. That would be the start. There's no one silver bullet, yeah? So for different target audiences, you would want to craft a message and an engagement agenda that fits the audience. It's a customer-driven model in today's world, so we have to find where people are and bring them to where we want them to be as the underlying approach. It can't just be we set it from the member and therefore it stands and the community is obligated to follow. Those days are gone, unfortunately, but they're gone. So now who your audiences are, and in fact one of the projects that we were working on with Zahir in Marabella, which I kind of fall short on, so my apologies, was developing a census. If you have a census of your membership and you know how many people are adults, parents, how many are youths, etc., how many need healthcare, how many are jobless, and so on. Just a census could inform a lot of your interaction and engagement. So, for example, if you have youths who are unemployed and you arrange to have them start a social media marketing trust or skill that they could then monetize for business, and we direct some resources to their creating content for whatever the agenda is, entrepreneurship, building your CV, LGBTQ, whatever, Islamic values, stories of the prophets, peace be on them, and so on. You might find that that is a good initiative for the young adults 17 to 25 for their side hustle or for their full-time employment, and so on. Yeah, you have a lot of different ways that this could go. But I agree with you, tackling the topic by itself head-on is not the best approach. In our context, we framed it within Western influence and Muslim society, Muslim youth. Were the title to say LGBTQ itself exclusively, we wouldn't have had a good response as good as this, yeah, as an example. So it's something to consider. This is sort of the face of it, yeah. That's our excellent presentation, disintegration of the family value, nurturing and tarbiyah. strong Islamic grounding being replaced by social media and societal influence, the key to this becoming so rampant? Well, social media has its role to play, undoubtedly. There's a good example, Ellen DeGeneres and Will and Grace and programs like that that were on popular TV, set-top television, also were very forgiving to the GLB community and very encouraging of acceptance by creating characters that people can admire or feel closer to. You get more influence or more buy-in. So it's not just digital, internet driven, it's also on mainstream cable and television. Celebrities and entertainers were encouraged to come out in public. So even actors or actresses or whoever that you admire could come out and reorient your acceptance from rejection to admiration or support or whatever. There are a number of ways that was designed to happen. Yeah. Like I say, it's been we 30 years behind the line, and we multiple of billions of dollars of resources behind the agenda. So what it requires is, at the ground level, at the family and at the community level, relationships, conversation or dialogue, and collaboration, reinforcement is not something that entire superstructure can compete with. So there is hope. It's not impossible. In that regard, I would hand back over to Haji Ahmed. And thank you very much for your attention. And I hope this was of value. And I look forward to working with you on this and other initiatives as we move this forward. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Dr. Fahim, for your good delivery. I see we have really opened up an issue and many people are interested in it and we need to learn more about it. If anyone wants books, contact me. I'll try and get it to you. I guess we'll close here and we say thank you all for attending and for your interest and your questions, and look forward to more programs like this. Imam Jamal, you want to make a closing dua? Huh? You there?
Yes.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. دعاء. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبحان الله وبحمده سبحان الله العظيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا مولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. ربنا زدنا علما ربنا زدنا علما ربنا زدنا علم. Oh Allah, we thank you for the opportunity to share and to acquire knowledge, oh Allah, and for the effort made in assisting our community members, oh Allah. We thank thee, we pray that you bless us and guide us along the right path, oh Allah. Help us to understand the issues that are pervading our society and to be able to assist, oh Allah. We pray that you bless us all and guide us all along the right path, oh Allah. Pardon us and forgive us for our shortcomings, oh Allah. Oh Lord, we pray that you protect us and keep us safe. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wassalamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Oh Allah, we pray that you'll bless our teachers, our presenters today, Dr. Fahim, and all those who participated, well, and guide us along the right path and cause this session to be of benefit and use to us, and so that we may, benefit others as well. Ameen. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wassalamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Ameen, ameen. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Imam Jamal. Okay, everyone. Thank you all. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.